Do you want to bring balance to all the wireless radiation fields in your life, including 5G? The OMNIA Radiation Balancer is a small sticker you can stick on any device. It changes the state of the field and creates a new resonance between the wireless radiation and your energy field. On the link below, you'll see all our testing results that show how the body responds excellently once you've made this change in your life. And here's a special offer for the Journey to Truth crowd. Just enter the word truth in caps at the checkout for your 10% discount. It's easy to bring balance back to your body with the OMNIA Radiation Balancer.
This is totally unreal that this happened like in 1942 on this planet.
Hey guys, welcome back to Journey to Truth podcast. This is week 2 of Secret Space Program month. We're joined by Johan Fritz. If you guys don't know who he is, you're going to find out. He has an incredible testimony, incredible memory recall. It's like a talking textbook. He's loaded with knowledge and information about what's going on right now, what's going on in the programs in space, underground. It's quite fascinating. Before we get into that, we're going to cover a few things. First of all, we understand that you guys all understand that there's a huge big tech purge right now. Twitter is wiping people out, YouTube, all those alternative platforms. So we just want to remind you where you can find us all. We still, as during this recording, we still have a Twitter account. You can obviously find us here on YouTube. What else? BitChute, Bradion, Rumble for the video podcast. Then we are on all audio podcasts,
Spotify, and a bunch of others.
iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, and like 15 others. I'm not exaggerating. It's quite a bit.
We're on Facebook,
Instagram, or not Instagram anymore,
not
Facebook.
Instagram anymore.
Right. And then we have personal accounts on Instagram, Gab, Parler.
Gab,
yeah. So anyway, just so you guys know, because people keep asking, where can we find you? So just get that out of the way. And then you guys just listen to the Omnia commercial, 10% off with promo code TRUTH, all caps. And then Hopewell Farms, we do have that promo code going again, JTT15 for 15% off CBD oil and other products. It's the best
CBD.
It's really good. Aaron's been taking CBD for a while, and he says it's the best, so we're just going to go with his word. No, it really is good. It's really great stuff. And this promo code does stack with free shipping for over $200 or more. So that does stack with that deal also, just to let you know. And we have t-shirts, 20% off on our Teespring page with promo code Sleepy Joe. And that's going to go indefinitely. That being said, welcome to the show, Johan. How's it going over there? Thanks for joining us.
I'm doing very well. Thank you guys for having me. It's a pleasure to be on.
Yeah, absolutely. So
yeah.
I'm going to briefly read through your bio. Actually, you know what? I'll put the bio in the description, and we'll let you kind of give us a background of your testimony, what you've been through, and how this all started for you.
Well, I'll start off with the succinct version, which is still kind of long, but I'll do that first, and then we'll kind of go back and drill into the details. If that's okay with you guys.
Sure. And really quick, guys, we understand that there's a little audio issue. There's a hum or a buzz. There's nothing we can do about it, so just bear with us, please.
So for me, the way it started off was I was screened as a kid because of my family background, because of my intuitive empathic abilities, because of my personality disposition, and certain genetic markers. All those things make up what they call a metagene. And that meta gene is what enables certain people in the programs to use certain technology. It also allows them to enhance or be used in certain ways that other programs can't use you. So as a kid, they already knew I had this. From age 5 up through age 12, I was being constantly abducted, trained. I was being put through MKUltra, which you guys, or the follow-on MK Pegasus, which ended in 95. If you guys know what that is.
Yes.
Then age 12, that's when I actually started what I would call real super soldier training. For Peter the Insider, between age 12 and 14, apparently I still carry the record as having gone through all 4 layers of that fastest. So, for whatever that's worth. And at age 14, then they started actually putting me into called training missions, where they actually would have us in simulated armor. We would go through and do simulated battles up through age 17, 18. And a lot of this stuff as a kid, for me, was showing up as dreams. I didn't know how to quite process that. My mom just thought I had a super hyperactive imagination. Not the case. So at age 17, I actually enlisted in what's called DEP, which is a delayed enlistment program for the U.S. military. And that's when all the abductions stopped for me, was the minute I enlisted in the Marine Corps. And I actually went through what they called an early boot camp program at that point. They don't have that anymore, but they used to have what they called an early boot camp program. I went through that, came back, went through my senior year, and then I finished up the last remaining part of my 4 years in as after my graduation from high school. Now, during that time, when I was actually enlisted and overseas, that's when all the stuff for the programs began for me. Specifically, the tracking that they had been doing since I was a kid, it followed me all the way through the military. And at that point, when I got to Diego Garcia, that's where I was taken off planet. I was put through what they called NDOC. A company called Shoreline runs the NDOC process on the moon. You're put through that. And then once you go through that NDOC process, they figure out where they're going to send you. Like who are they sending you to do actual work in the programs, right? My case, I qualified as a grunt, a soldier. Imagine that, right? And so at that point, I was sent to a program called Kruger, where I worked. I had 2 alters actually I know of at least that were in Kruger. And then one of those alters, the guy who I've using the moniker for here, the alias, that was my name in that particular program, which is Johan Fritz. That particular alias was transferred out at a certain point to what they called JDFC's Joint Defense Forces Command. They have a sub-command called Mars Defense Forces. And I basically was transferred there. I went through their boot camp, their weapon program. We did some missions with them. While I was doing that stuff, I was being screened by another officer for Dark Fleet, what CG calls Dark Fleet, Nancht Waffen Regir. And at that point, that's when I got brought into working off planet outside the solar system. And eventually there was a decision that had to be made among all the Dark Fleet Command people, staff, where we decided, are we taking the black goo and are we putting up a slavery? And another group was already kind of being formulated off to the side, which is called the Alliance. And there's 2 segments to the Alliance. But one of these segments approached us and said, we know that you guys are talking about this idea of breaking away from Nancht Waffen Regir. We could use people with your background, your intelligence background, your weapons, your ships, all that stuff. We could use that in our group if you guys are willing to help join us to help protect Terra and protect our colonies. And at that point, the guy that we call the old man, he called all of his senior staff, like me. I was aide de camp at this point.
Really quick, when you say old man, is that who Corey refers to as Sigmund? Is this the same guy?
So the originator of Sigmund is a clone.
Okay.
Let's be clear. And we're going to get to that in a little bit when we start talking about some of these other programs, okay?
Sure.
But Sigmund was a clone that they use for security purposes. So people like the old man would upload Sigmund with a certain level of information and then have him go deliver it.
Okay.
That way, if somebody took him out, it doesn't take out the old man. And by the way, he knows when he dies, because when he rehomes, he has all that knowledge still here.
Yeah. So there's a lot you're skimming through that people don't understand. So when you get through it, I'd like to go back and break down, like, as far as Diego Garcia, Kruger, even whenever you refer to Terrans or Terra, like that, people don't know that that's what they refer to. That's what they refer to as Earth.
People off world call Earth Terra.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we'll get into that. But yeah, continue.
Can I give a real quick shout out, by the way, while we're going through all this?
Yeah.
I have four groups of people, actually 5 groups, but I'm going to go through them real quick here. First, I want to give a shout out to James Rink, Super Soldier Talk. Mm-hmm. Awesome videos. Just as a shameless plug, if you guys haven't seen the SSP 101 video, please go watch it. It gives a amazing overview of what we're talking about.
We've both seen it.
We're putting together the 102 or the part 2 or whatever James is going to call it. We're doing that right now. So you guys will see a follow-on that has all the tech, the ship stuff, the weapons, the vehicles, the armor.
I cannot wait.
That's coming out.
For those who don't know, that first one is 4 hours long, if I'm not mistaken. It's a 4-hour long video of basically the history of the SSP with him and James Rink, who we will have on at the end of the month. But yeah, it's fascinating.
James is a good friend of mine. He's awesome. We tried to put everything in there that we could think of. Now, James and I have a bit of a disagreement on like timeline and place, but the overall gist of what you're seeing in that outline in 101 video is very, very succinct and pretty accurate. So if you haven't watched it, please do. There will be like a part 2 or a 102 video coming out, so don't be surprised when that jumps. The second person I'd like to give a shout out to, or the channel, is Jessica Morocco's channel, her and Peter the Insider. Hello, guys. Thank you guys for having me on. And Peter, you're awesome, as always. Third channel I'd like to give a shout out to is Guided with Jody Reynosa, or Jody's Gems. I'll be doing a video with her on the 23rd. So if you guys, again, want to hear some more more of the spiritual side, how do we get healed part, I'll be talking about that on there.
Interesting.
And as you guys have seen on Quantum Red Pill Cafe with Ted and I'll give a shout to Ted. On that video, we've also done the same thing. We've been trying to address, some of these issues around how do we go from having been in a fractured state to now in a healed state. And as we're talking about some of the subjects around the SSP, this subject keeps coming up. So Ted and I keep addressing it because people want to know. They're like, well, how do I get myself into a better, healthier spiritual state and a better, healthier emotional, mental state, right?
Sure.
So that's obviously a concern for those of us that have been in. It's something that we all have to do, but more specifically, people who've done the programs have to do that. So thank you for letting me do that. And there you go.
Yeah. No, that's cool that you're doing that, actually, because that's actually the most important thing, because what good are we if we're not healed?
Correct.
So that's thank you. I'm actually really looking forward to hearing that. Maybe we could touch on some of that later in this interview also, but I don't know exactly where you were in your testimony. It's up to you. You can keep going, or we can go back and start breaking it down.
So here's what I'll start breaking down the timeline so people can get kind of an idea of where things kind of happened, right?
Yeah, please.
So I was born in 1972. I should tell you about how old I am, ironically. By 1977, age 5, that's when I was in kindergarten, and I was also brought into MKUltra. Now, the way that looks for people is essentially when I went in as a Gen 5, Gen 6 super soldier, what that looks like to people is that I went through what they call the trauma side of training. Now, how do they do that, right? Well, for example, like at age 5, they started me off, and I think I've talked about this previously, where they'd have us in simulations. They'd put us in a simulation in a cage. This guy with this big wife beater comes in, you have to actually kill him. That's the only way to win the confrontation, is to kill the guy. Step 2 is once you've killed him the first time, they put this little girl behind you have to protect. Now, what I've found out post this is the girl who was behind me was the girl who ended up being my XO on board the Franklin. Right. We actually served together in Kruger, which I didn't know either, but we were talking about it, and all of a sudden it's like, whoa. It's like all these little synchronicities. Like she knew the other half of the same story that I already knew.
Wow.
And what we call that is called, we have like what we call a divine partner, or a divine pairing between two people. That's how that shows up, is they look for people like that. Someone who you are, in fact, divinely connected with, spiritually connected with, that this person can anticipate your behavior, what you're going to say, what you're going to do, and how you're going to act. That way it cuts down reaction time. And this lady ended up, she was that young girl in that cage with me. And the next step was me and her teaming up to beat up the man, the killed guy, you know.
Mm.
So at age 8, at that point, I would have been probably 1980-ish. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's where there's a phrase that Eminem uses in the movie 8 Mile when he's doing his song, where he says, "This is when the mood all changed. It's like having 2 dogs in a cage." That was me at age 8, because at that point, the simulations, from having this whole simulation side to now actually physically doing something. It actually abducted me and pulled me in to physically actually do a behavior or an act.
So in this, excuse me, for in the just to help people understand, in this simulation, is this like a hologram? Like you're a guy that comes in, does it look real, or does he see through? Is he transparent?
No, it's real.
Oh,
it looks like it is a real scenario. I didn't even know it was a hologram or a simulation until the very first time I was brought into the actual act at age 8. Okay. That's what one of the guards told me. He said, "Well, you've graduated all your simulations. Now you get to do the real thing."
And then they put you in a real life or death scenario at that point.
Well, the very first real life and death scenario for me was the one that I've chatted about, where they bring me into a room. I've got a guard on either side of me. I'm age 8 at this point. In front of me is a 55-gallon fish tank on a table. In front of the table is a gun. To my right corner, I see someone sitting with a hood on their head. And there's a gentleman sitting back in the shadows. All I can see is his hands, his wrists, and the front part of his feet. And by the way, for those people who don't know, go look up Dr. West. He's a guy who ran MKUltra for a number of years. He also ran MK Pegasus for a number of years. I believe that guy was him.
Oh.
And based on the ring he had on his hand and based on the way he looked in that memory, from what I've seen of him during his interviews, and get this too, right? So this same guy testified at the Patty Hearst trial, which should tell you that Patty Hearst was probably programmed. And also, too, he testified at the Oklahoma City bombing, which should tell you those 2 individuals, meaning Timothy McVeigh and his partner, were both probably programmed. So all this crap that people are talking about where they're saying, well, the government wouldn't do that. Well, yeah, they do.
Yeah. Not only do they do it, that's how they operate.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that at age 8, I was in this room, and the first 52 times I would not kill the person in the hood. Now, how does that look? Well, either I'm being drowned, electrocuted, meaning they strap electrical straps to your gonads and electrocute you till you die. They could beat the crap out of you, stab you, whatever. Maybe they use the gun on you, right? But those first 52 times I died. At the 53rd time, something changed for me, because when they brought me in, I basically had this thought in my head, is like I'm not doing that again. And when they brought me in the room, by the time he got out, "What do you need?" He'd normally say, "What do you need to do?" But when he said, "What do you need?" I'd already grabbed the gun, shot the person in the hood, and I was actually pulling the upper receiver back to see if there's another round inside the magazine. And the gentleman sitting in the chair looked at me and said, "Why are you checking the magazine for?" I said, "If there's a second bullet, I'm shooting you." At that point, he said, "Congratulations, number 3, you passed." Now, what I mean by that is that everyone who's in the programs, when you're going through MKUltra, you're numbered. Every group, meaning every pod, you should have 20 people in a pod, and they're all numbered. So you have 1 through 20. And I was number 3. And he told me that number 1 through number 2 had already been killed. They were not coming back to the program, so they couldn't pass.
So whenever you say you were killed and you come back, people need to understand that. So is this a regen tank technology? They bring you back, or is this or are they just, is it a clone of you that's being killed and there's original? No. Okay.
This is actually regen or hollow medbed technology. The reason why they do that, the reason why they leave the memory of you dying, is so that when you become an adult, you no longer fear death. You have zero fear of death.
So when you're out on the battlefield, you'll do anything without thinking of the consequences. Yeah.
Correct. And more importantly, also what that does is it also, in my case, and my girlfriend and I've chatted about this, in my case, the other thing that did was it also changed my fight or flight reflex, meaning that I don't have any flight reflex. Mine's all fight. So when it comes to someone like jumping in my crap and all of a sudden there's like, well, we're going to do this or this to you, it's like my brain goes, okay, it's time for you to die. That's the way my brain computes the math. It's like I'm already a 4.3 black belt and a prior combat Marine. You really want to do this?
Yeah.
Excluding all the super soldier crap, right?
Yeah.
So that's where, for me, my brain is already wired differently than most people in that respect. But what happened at age 8, that started the process where the real stuff started. And they would go through multiple iterations of this until they actually had your brain broken, usually for about a 4-year period. Every night I had abductions. Every night I would go through this. Every night I would, have these iterations. At age 12, that changed again. At that point, they brought me to this place up at the LOC where essentially I was put through what's called super soldier training. It was the very first time I was put into a room with a bunch of kids. If you guys ever watched the movie Soldier,
Universal Soldier?
No, Soldier. It has the lady who's married to Rock Hudson, her husband.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't know if I've seen that movie.
Kate Hudson's dad. He's
Okay.
he's a very well-known actor. Stepdad, I guess. Anyhow, that movie, you go look up Soldier. Essentially, the way you see the kids being brought up in those groups, military-wise, that is exactly what the beginning of MKUltra looks like when you're actually in the super soldier part. Except they're teaching you how to function as a unit. Like you'll go through tests where you're expected to not talk at all. Because what they're looking for is psychically, they want to make sure all these people are bonded, right? The second thing that happens is they're looking for natural born leaders. Who gives the orders? Well, it was me and another guy, and we were the ones constantly giving the orders. So they broke us up into groups, and we were allowed to run our units as kids. And that's where they start picking out these people with natural leading abilities.
So did you get your memory back immediately, or what, how did that process occur?
So for me, it came in steps, right? The first step was I got out of the military. I basically was a functioning alcoholic, and I had a lot of issues around PTSD, stress, anger. Most of it was redirected anger, I would have to say in hindsight. And a lot of it came from the fact that I didn't realize what had been done to me.
Mm-hmm.
And when I finally made that connection, I was working with this lady, Connie, that I talk about. When she helped me make that connection, all of a sudden, the whole dynamic inside here changed.
Mm.
We started doing all the post-hypnotic regression stuff. And the second half of the session would be like her doing like massage work, Reiki work, energy work, maybe even actual therapy, like sitting and talking about how'd that feel to you, where your emotions at. Let's talk about processing that, right?
Yeah.
So she was a licensed therapist, a board certified therapist and counselor. But she was more like metaphysically minded. And she was the person that kind of helped me navigate through working through all that stress. And what happened is she popped a lot of the memory caps. Now, I would have to say this, at that time, my brain was not ready yet to release that information. So from 96 to 2012, I was going through this steady process of my brain, my subconscious saying, I'm ready to release this now, right? 2012, I had an NDE. All of a sudden, any chemical blank slating, any psychic memory barriers, any of that stuff popped during that NDE. I come back. And by the way, I'm not saying go have an NDE. I have to be clear about this because through some of my discussions, some people have gotten the impression that that's okay to go do. No, it's not. Don't do it.
And some people who don't know what that is because maybe they don't NDE near-death experience. Just
Correct,
to clarify. Yeah.
So in my case, I had that happen. And then when that happened, all of a sudden, I went through this massive change internally. I had met this woman who I'd been married to. And through that process, I basically had a bunch of these memories starting to crop up. And what I started doing was I took all these old documents that Connie had given me. I had already scanned them into Word docs, basically. And I started formulating the flow of how all this stuff kind of fit together. I was listening to other people who had been through this, and I was trying to reformulate what happened to me. Like, where does that fit structure-wise into what happened to me, right?
Mm.
So over the years, I've been writing all of that stuff down.
Okay.
And what had happened is after I started writing all this stuff down, I started trying to figure out where these memories fit into the timeline. And that's that timeline we were just talking about, right? So when I got taken up there, this is after the super soldier training, right? So I go through that 14, join the military. All of a sudden, the deduction stopped, and I'm like, whoa, this is kind of weird. But basically, for a year, I didn't have any abductions, and I thought that was fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it was my senior year in high school, it was like the most peaceful time I had, because I already knew I had a job post high school, and I didn't feel like I had the abductions going, so I could actually sleep at night. I didn't have like all the stress and all that crap going on.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I get in the military, and all of a sudden I see that same folder that showed up from grade school, where I had my name, my data, all the information about me, all my intuitive testing that happened at grade school. By the way, they do this, by the way. A doctor would come to our school, and I was like a disciplinary problem. So like every time I got sent to the principal's office, he'd do like the typical like psychologist voice, right? He'd be like, "Will, let's sit down. Let's talk."
That's a good impression.
"I need you to breathe with me, Will. Can you breathe with me?" He'd do that kind of voice, and you're kind of going, "Oh, okay." And then he'd pull this deck of cards out, and he'd say, "Will, what's on the card? How does this feel to you? What symbol is this?" And it was a Zener deck, by the way, for those people who don't know what a Zener deck is. And I would guess it. I had no idea. He never tell me if I was right or not, by the way. But I would guess the stuff. And when I got in the military, I see we're doing our psyche evals. And here I am as a squad leader, and I've got this other squad ahead of me going through doing their stuff. I'm hearing all the answers that he's talking about. So I'm like, okay, well, I know what I'm going to say when I go in. I literally walk in the door, report in as ordered, sit down. He looks at my name, he pulls his head back a little bit. He gets up, he walks over, he shuts the door, which has been open the whole time, mind you. And then he pulls out the official Marine Corps crap and goes, "Okay, we're just going to pencil whip this. That's done." He goes, "Okay." He goes, "Now let's get to the real crap." And he pulls that stupid binder out. I'm like, oh, God damn it.
The binder from when you were a kid.
Yes. And I'm looking at that thing going, oh, man, he's going to open that binder and they're going to kick me straight out of boot camp. I thought I was done.
Yeah.
And he opens it up. I see in there, there's like stuff listed in there. It says on the intuitive empathic test part, it's like an 85% accuracy rating from kindergarten up through 11th grade. Right?
That's really good.
On the personality disposition part, that's the part I found problematic, because it had stuff like, this individual does not respect authority. This individual is highly aggressive. This individual uses violence as a tool. And like shit like this is showing up on the list, and I'm going, oh my God.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like all this stuff showing up. I'm just like, oh Jesus, this is not good. And he looked at it. He's like, do you want to serve your planet, your country, and your fellow countrymen and protect them with the best of your abilities? Yes or no? I looked at him like, I thought that's what I was doing, sir. He's like, you don't understand, recruit. He asked me that 3 times. By the third time I finally said yes. He's like, when you get to your AIT screening, when they actually screen you again for your AIT testing, he goes, you need to give the captain who you talk to this word, and he will give you a word if you give him this word. That's how they actually track people who are starting to enter the programs, is through these keywords. Different programs, different access to these programs are tracked by keywords. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so
they would have to have some type of system in place. Yeah.
Well, it's called challenge and response system. So when you come into an area and they give you that keyword, what they do is they look at their list and they give you the response to that list, which is them upgrading you or giving you the new keyword or challenging that keyword, right? Point is that happened with me through the military and happened twice. And the third time was when I went to the moon. So I get deployed to my unit in Okinawa after going through AIT, jump school, all that stuff. I get to Okinawa and we get deployed. And when we got to Diego Garcia, that's where I got taken off the planet. We're actually on a refuel. We actually flown from Okinawa, Japan to Diego Garcia, and we landed there. to do a refuel. And what they were going to do is fly helicopters from Diego Garcia or the airplane from Diego Garcia to either Yemen or UAE, and we take helicopters back down to the Kitty Hawk, CH-53Ds. And that was the plan, anyhow.
Now, so all your training you were just telling us about, that all happened on Earth? Correct. All the MKUltra, all the training. Okay, so then Diego Garcia is an island in the Indian Ocean, for those who don't know.
The actual super soldier training happened up there.
Okay.
But everything excluding that happened down here.
Okay.
Just so we're clear.
And then Diego Garcia, is that just a military base on an island in the Indian Ocean?
It's actually in the Indian Ocean. Yeah. Let me see if I got a picture of it here somewhere.
Yeah, let me allow you to screen share here if I can.
Yeah. I was pretty sure I do.
Multiple participants can share.
I'll do it this way. I'll just look it up on Google. Yeah, Google.
Yeah, if you have anything you want to share to back up anything you're saying, because I know you do have some really awesome photos and documents and stuff.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
So let's go to maps, actually. This would be easier to do this. Okay. All right, we'll bring this up on the share screen. That way people can actually see it. Okay, so you guys can see this now, right?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. That's awesome.
So this is where I would say the majority of people that go out as foot soldiers, especially for special ops or your Marines or your Navy, you're probably getting flown out of Diego Garcia off planet. This is also the number one place where the Merchant Marine Fleet, when they do exchanges for slaves to whatever, they're doing it here as well. And the point that we were at was there called Point Marianne, which is the southern end of the airport at Diego Garcia. So if you look in here, there's this long 2.5 mile long runway, right?
Mm-hmm.
Point Marianne is the very southern, I guess, southeastern end of that runway. And that's where I had to walk to from the other end of the runway. We landed, we had to walk from this northwestern tip all the way down to the base down here. There's some empty buildings down at that southeastern end. Point is that as we did that, right, we end up and we get down there, and that's where we went through what they called phase 3 of screening, which basically involves they bring people in from upstairs from the moon. They come in, they essentially do what they call a temporal, synaptic, and physical scan of the body, including DNA. They do that so if anything happens to you, they have a record of how to rebuild you, basically. That makes sense.
It's like a blueprint. Yeah.
Yes. And also, by the way, that blueprint is used when you go through what they call blank slating, and they use that retrovirus to actually rewrite parts of who you are. That is actually what is being done. That retrovirus is being programmed biologically, like a CRISPR bug, to re-edit parts of you to get you back to where you were at age 21.
So that's how the age regression technology works?
It's part of it. They also use chemicals that it's the same chemicals they're currently using today for like diabetes medication. They also inject that into your system. And what that does is it reduces the inflammation. It reduces the cellular degradation. There's a whole bunch of stuff. And what it does is it basically makes you de-age by 10 to 20 years at a whack. But the virus is rewriting the internal stuff. So that's usually the two-step. Anyhow, the point is that they're doing all this, the baseline, the baseline material to get you back to that point before they even take you off planet. They're also doing a timeline snap, meaning they're looking at where are you at in Earth's current timeline if they have to do a looking glass reinsertion to dump you back here, right?
Yeah.
They want to know the time, the place, location, the timeline, and also, too, what condition are you in that timeline?
When you, I remember on one of your interviews, you were talking about looking glass, and you shared some photos, some drawings of, it was like the actual technology itself and the floor in Area 51 called Alice's Lair or Alice's Floor.
Yeah, it's just right here.
Yeah, if you don't mind, because that is absolutely, I don't know where that stuff comes from, but if it's accurate, that's that's good to have. That's good to know.
There's actually a guy named Adrian Basaggio who actually released this out to people. He actually put this data out there for folks to look at to show that it was real. And I actually got a copy of it after looking at one of his presentations. Now, this is the interesting part, right? So I want everyone to think about the number of TV, movie, video references that use the white rabbit down here in the bottom left-hand corner.
And the fact that they call that Alice's floor, and that aligns with some Q drops also in Project Looking Glass. Correct,
yeah. And the white rabbit is essentially the idea of literally going down through the temporal wormhole, going from timeline A, place A, to timeline A, place B, somewhere either forward or back in the timeline. Right?
Yeah.
So yes, this technology does have its pluses and minuses. We actually have a group that works underneath the ICC Super Board. All they do is temporal operations. I've talked about that quite a bit with the change in certain presidents, the change in certain scenarios, temporal timelines being rewritten or flipped or recombined as or as they call it, recombinated. So yeah, that stuff happens. That's why. The bottom line is, all these checks were done. They hit us with a drug. They knocked us out as we were taking our clothes off. They wanted no Terran clothing, no Terran marking on us, including dog tags, by the way, when we went up to the LOC. The next thing I remember was waking up inside the Dart. Me and two other gentlemen.
It's a Dart. I was just going to ask you, what craft did you take to the LOC?
It was a Dart, and the two gentlemen who had knocked us out actually were the two guys piloting the craft. And basically for me, what happened was I woke up inside the Dart and I looked to my right, and down where the handle would be on the door, there's like this embossed area that basically said built by Lockheed Martin, and it had their little emblem on it right in that area of the door. So I know who built the craft.
Of course, we know Lockheed and Boeing. I mean, they've been
well. And I worked for Northrop Grumman underneath of some of Lockheed's programs unknowingly after this.
Really?
Well, that's where these black budget programs spawn from. That's where this technology is created. And there's think tanks. I mean, that's what William Tompkins talks about, sitting in on those think tanks. That's where a lot of these designs came from.
So at that point, as I'm sort of awake, I'm kind of groggy. I hear these two pilots talking about this idea of what they call Jericho, which is a city on the moon. That's what it means in Arabic. And when I heard that phrase, the ship was turning this way, and you could see the broken off Pyramidion and the upper area of the LOC on the moon inside this crater, the Jules Verne crater. And they were diving at this, what looked to me like another crater inside there. I thought we were going to hit the surface. We went right through it. And
it's a hologram.
I blacked out again. And by the time I woke back up, that was when the door was opening up and we were being drugged out of this dark craft by these guys in black camis. And they bring us into this area that Shoreline uses for reception. And they basically handcuff you to the seat, and they also ankle cuff you to the seat so you can't move or run. And I don't know how long I was there, but I remember this guy sitting next to me basically said, don't look around. They'll see you. If you wake up, they will know you're awake. He said, this guy over here, he's already dead. And when I kind of moved my head up a little bit, this guy had his head all the way back, and he was ashen gray, and he was dead.
Wow.
And they were giving us a drug injection when we were in the chair, which I'm guessing was done to basically magnify or amplify our psychic abilities. Some people don't have the ability to handle that injection very well, or they negatively react to it. Same way we do with viral stuff today here on Earth.
Sure.
Sometimes people's bodies just doesn't agree with the shot, right?
Yeah.
At that point, I'm screened again. And after going through that screening process, I'm essentially put through what they call INDOC, which basically means indoctrination. They put you through an MKUltra upgrade. They give you a whole bunch of packages based on the programs you're going to be in. They call up certain altars. They program those altars up.
Now explain what an altar is.
Sleep.
Explain what an altar is, please, for people who don't know.
Okay, so the easiest way for me to explain this without getting into a whole bunch of psychological technobabble is to say that when you go through trauma, a part of you disassociates from the current cognitive mind. Part of your subconscious will disassociate away from that to protect the mind. And that part that disassociates is the alter ego, the alter.
Mm-hmm.
And what they do in the program is they take that disassociative part, they crack it open, they dump all the memories, the trauma, the pain, all the programming, all the language upgrades, every skill set you would need is dumped into that altar at that time. Every 72 hours after an upgrade, you're tested. So, for example, you might walk into a room and they'll start immediately speaking to you in German. And they expect you to recall and talk in fluent German as if it's a normal thing to do once that altar is activated, which is usually activated through either a set of keywords or a set of key alphanumerics, usually. And as you're talking to these guys, they may have you do like martial arts. Show me this particular martial arts style. You do it. You do a full kata on what that is. Show me how to use this weapon. And they have like weapons laying in front of you on the table. You have to pick the right weapon. You have to be able to basically chamber around, fire the weapon at the target, pull the magazine out and put it back on the table as if it's autonomic reflex.
So it's like the Matrix, basically, in a way.
The Matrix does not do it justice, in my opinion, because it's not like, in my opinion, Neo is still bound by his own brain.
Okay.
Whereas with this, there is no bounds. It's like essentially in the altar, there's nothing up here limiting you on what you can do. There is no limits. There are no morals. There are no laws. There are no black and white. It is just do or not do.
So Neo's character was just to make it digestible for the audience.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, continue. This is fascinating. Yeah.
So once I went through all that stuff, at some point, one of the guards came in and I didn't realize it was my final testing in INDOC. He comes in, he's like, you've already been requested to go to your next assignment. So what I didn't realize at that time until later, when Peter and I were chatting about it, was that Gabriel Kruger had actually requested me to come directly to Kruger because of my test scores. Because he was screening everyone that went through my particular INDOC program. Like, where are these people at on their scores? Like, what are their aptitude tests? What are their IE tests? What are their weapon tests? Martial art tests, all this stuff. What is this person? What can they do? Right?
Yeah.
Apparently, the minute he saw my test scores, he's like, I want that guy and I want him here now. So I get jerked out of training. And I'm thinking I'm getting blank slated, by the way, at this point. I didn't realize I'm getting sent somewhere else. I thought I was getting blank slated. But all of a sudden, the guy brings me to a separate room. He says, take off all your clothes. We're going to give you a new set of clothing to walk through the base. That way people don't know who you are or where you are. Change my clothes. We're walking on the first level, by the way, of the LOC. There's a landing area out here. Shoreline's the back area of that landing area. That's where we do all their INDOCs on the same floor. That way, if you somehow don't make it through INDOC, they can immediately take you back to the earth and blank slate you. That makes sense to everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And blank slating, I remember you said one time, like 3 to 5% of blank slating of people, it doesn't work on 3 to 5% of people, and you're one of them. And I guess all the whistleblowers are. Yeah,
just to a certain degree, yes.
Yeah, okay. Now, what point does this code word come in that they gave you?
That was during INDOC, right when I first woke up, actually. They basically saw me looking around. These guards yell, we have a live one. They run over to where I am. They uncuff me. My legs are actually asleep. I can't feel my legs at this point. They drag me into this room. They're kind of laughing at me because I can't walk. And they slam me down this metal chair, and they recuff me again, hand-wise and ankle-wise. I felt like I was in there for like, I don't know how many hours, but this guy in a white, it looked like a white scientist coat. I jokingly call these guys eggheads. They kind of walk in, and the guy's like, okay, we're going to do the test. And he had like a little pocket protector for pins and all this stuff in it. And he comes in, he's like, okay, we're going to do this test. He goes, what is it that I need to know? And the first 2 times, I'm like, what the fuck is this guy talking about? And all of a sudden, the third time, I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Keyword, right? Keyword the captain gave me. I gave the guy the keyword, and I see him, he pulls his glass pad out, and he starts scrolling down through it. He's like, whoa. It's like, okay. He clicks on that. He goes, okay, really? All right. And he clicks on some other stuff. There's a large glass double two-way mirror behind him. These people are watching me and him interact. And all of a sudden I hear the scientist say to me, I can hear him say it, but I also heard him say it. He said, is there anything else that I need to know right now? I said, there's a guy standing behind that piece of glass holding a woman in a way that he's going to actually physically injure her. And I said the guy's name because I was looking at him through the reflection in the glass. I could see his name tag in the reflection of the glass. And all of a sudden, the doctor went, what? And they hear this voice come on the loudspeaker. He's like, yep, he's one of us. Go send him through INDOC.
Yeah.
So they were already watching what we were doing.
Yeah.
And that's why I went through this whole INDOC process, right? Well, when I got my clothing changed, that's when this guard basically guided me down to, they call 4-6, which, okay, the upper floor where the landing area is looks like a 1950s military base.
Mm-hmm.
You get down to 4-6, and it looks like a super upgraded, like a high-end mall. If that makes sense to anybody?
Sure.
It's like the walkway area is solid white tile, and on the sides it's these red carpeting, and a lot of the main rooms is red carpeting too, right?
Yeah.
So here I am walking down this hall with this guy as we step out of the elevator, turn to the right, and we're walking down to this area all the way, this office all the way down the very end. And we stop at the front door. There's these two big posters on either side. One is a male in this black body armor, which I might have a picture of here somewhere. See if I can find it real quick.
Does the inside? I've heard Corey Good talk about the insides of the LOC being like a bell shape. Is that accurate?
Yes, it is. Well, I would say it's more spheroid bellish, but yes.
Okay.
So on the poster, this is kind of what it looked like, the armor wise. The artist who did this did a really, really good job. But the idea is that this particular poster, they had two of them, one male, one female. And on the bottom of each poster, it said, when you need to tie up all loose ends and you want nothing left undone, call Kruger. And it's all in German, by the way. Right?
Yeah. And Kruger is, it's like an off the books military group up in the SS in the programs.
Yeah. And another thing too, by the way, I'll show some people this as well. This might actually help some folks if they want to figure out what's going on. So I'll share this as well really quick. This is the website that Peter and Jessica are having us refer people to. This is the ACIO's website. It's acio-agency.org.
It's like Alien Contact Intelligence Organization or something like that.
Yep. And if you go over here to where it has...
Oh, it's at the top.
It
I didn't see it.
Good job reading. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't even see it at the top.
If you go down to where it says Worldwide Military Corps and click on that, you can see right here, it actually has Kruger listed as one of the military corps. Now, again, I'm not advocating the timeline or the locations, but I would say in terms of who they are and what they do, this is very accurate.
Did you not say one time there's a video game called like Mirror's Edge or something that uses the Kruger logo?
Yes, yes, actually, that is correct. I might actually have some screen captures out of that, actually, if I think about it here. Let's see here.
Guys who for the listeners out there, I know this is a lot of information to digest, and it's hard to get through it all. And really, it's hard to get through it without being distracted because things need to be explained. So we apologize if we're all over the place here, but just bear with us.
This is one of the many images where you see Kruger put on the back wall inside of the Kruger Sec building, and this individual here, believe it or not, in real life, she is the granddaughter of Gabriel Kruger, Faith Connors.
Really?
And this is from the video game, though? This is a screenshot?
This is from from Mirror's Edge Catalyst, the 2019 version, yes. And there's tons of this in there, by the way. Tons of disclosure on stuff.
So direct SSP disclosure down to that person.
Yes. Gabriel Kruger's in that game. Faith Connors is in that game, his granddaughter. There's a bunch of people in there.
What's that one Call of Duty game that has Kevin Spacey in it?
I think
you know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm. Like, where he
that he's like but then
Call of Duty Cold War, maybe. Is that the right one?
But I mean, I'm sure you'll get to that later. But The guy that
Well,
looks like Kevin Spacey.
Kevin Spacey shares a special place. The clone of him has shared a special place in my heart knot. And we'll get to that here in a second.
Paul Serene, yeah.
Paul Serene, yes, my old buddy, yes. But the idea is that I get to Kruger, and when I walk in the door, there's a desk to the left, a reception desk. The lady sitting at that desk is Gabriel Kruger's daughter, Alexandria. And she stands up, and this guard the whole time in the elevator, he's like, don't fuck this up for me. I got the hots for this girl. She's really pretty. If you screw this up, I will make sure you're blank slated, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. He's giving that whole speech, right? I'm kind of like, whatever, And we get in there, and I see Alexandra stand up, and he hands her my glass pad. And all of a sudden, as she's reading the glass pad, Gabriel Kruger walks out of his office and comes out front, and he's standing there looking right at me. And he walks over and looks at the glass pad that his daughter's looking at, and he makes a recommendation. He says, put him in Naguma's company and put him in Peter's fire team.
So what?
Now I'm looking for that reference. Just a second, okay, so people understand the impact of that statement, right? So he walks back over to his office. This guy who I call Commander Naguma, which may be the wrong name, but in my head, that's what I seem to remember. He comes out, and I've actually met this guy in the here and now. He does have memories of Faith because Naguma was dating Faith up there, and he's looking at my glass pad, and he's like, "Holy shit! Look at the scores this guy's got." And Alexander's like, "Yeah, Dad says to put him in your company with Peter, right?" The Peter he's talking about is Peter the Insider's fire team.
Okay. Peter
and I served together in Kruger for a while.
Interesting.
That's where the baseline information is. Like, Peter and I, we know each other on that level. Like, we served together. Like, I know his voice. I know how he's going to react. Psychically, I know how he thinks. That's what happens when you're in the fire team. You guys get kind of synced up, and when you're doing stuff, it's like you kind of enmeshed. You kind of know exactly what that person's going to do.
Sure.
So,
and that's why Peter, the Insider, has been such a crucial part of a lot of people coming forward.
Yeah. And also, too, by the way, I'll say this: if you go back to that ACI website, so yeah, Peter's stuff is on there. I'll share this really quick that you guys can look at it while we're talking about it. We actually put what we call it up here on the menu. We had ACI Associates, and Peter's bio is up here as well, by the way, and so is Jessica's. When you click on that, it brings up James's bio, it brings up Anthony Zender, and it brings up mine. This guy Michael down here, he is the guy who was in fact Commander Naguma, the guy I'm calling Commander Naguma.
Oh, interesting.
So anyhow, the idea is that so Naguma takes me back. He brings me into what's called receiving, right? The first thing they do when you go into Kruger is they actually put you into a clone body. That's the very first thing they do right off the bat. They have you take off all your clothing. They put it on this little cart that's next to this little cryo unit. They bring you over to a tank where you basically step inside this vertical tank. It fills up with this liquid auger mask on that has a display on the inside and a display on the glass. And what's happening is as this tank fills, what they're doing is they're getting ready to transfer the essence, either the alter or what's in your brain, to the clone.
Interesting.
Now, I looked over to my right, in my case, the clone was in the tank, already filled up asleep. And it looked like me, but it was much larger and very physically edited. I'll put it that way.
Okay.
And I started to panic a little bit, and the doctor, he's standing right in front of me. I can hear him talking to me through the earbuds in my mask. He says, "Don't worry, everyone panics the first time. He goes, just relax, and we'll get you taken care of." And he's speaking in German. He's speaking in German, by the way. And I'm kind of like, listen, I'm hearing, I'm like, wow, I should understand this guy, what he's saying. That's weird. And all of a sudden, I start pumping this gas in. I blacked out. And next thing I know, I'm waking up over in the other body.
When you woke up in the other body, could you see your original body?
Yeah, they were draining the tank. They pulled it out, put it inside a cryo unit, and slid it back inside this cryo storage area where they had a bunch of people that were in cryo.
And then that body is just kind of remained there for the duration of your time in the programs, and they put you back in that body before you were spliced back.
Kruger and Monarch are a few of the programs that use clone bodies. MDF and Nancht Waffen do not.
Okay.
They do not use clones. But Kruger does. And because what happens is with Kruger, since you're what they call a direct action team, what happens a lot of times is if you ever get shot, if you ever get wounded, if you ever die, there's two things they do. One, they always bring the body back. That way they can't recover the tech from the body because you're usually full of femtotech and other stuff that other companies want. And secondly, the part of you that's in the brain rehomes right back to the cryogenically stored body. So it's like having this weird kind of a weird save game. If you ever played video games and you have like a little save spot where you're like going in to do your boss fight, and all of a sudden you wake up and you're back in your body and you're like, crap, you know? They put you back in the tank, new clone, they send you back down after the same boss again.
It's almost like that's where they got it, the idea for respawning in a video game from the program.
Yes. But that's what happens in some cases. It happened to me a few times. And what ends up occurring is at a certain point, you figure out that you also have these MKUltra abilities that are there as well, the super soldier abilities. So working with some of the technology in there, they would have some of us work in the labs. This guy that we call Dr. N, essentially he was the guy that built all of the implants and augments for people. He also gave the guidelines on cybernetics if they were to be used in Kruger. And a lot of times, like with me, he would have me test the implants, the stuff they put on the outside of the skin that activated some of your super soldier abilities, right? You can immediately subconsciously tap into that part of the psyche that says, well, I'm going to manipulate time. I'm going to warp and manipulate time, space, matter to do such and such, right? So a couple of us, level 1 super soldier is what we call a runner, the equivalent of a runner in Catalyst, right?
Yeah.
What we would do is what I would do is Dr. M would give me a new implant, wherever it happened to be. He'd say, go test it. So what I would do is I'd get into some running gear. I would go up to level 1, piss off the security guys, and try to make it back down via the stairwells, back down to level 6 without getting caught. And I did it every single time.
Really?
I would literally use the walls. Like, you know what parkour is? It's essentially what we were trained to do. They would upload parkour into our brains. Nice. And we would literally use the walls. Like I would manipulate an area on the wall. Peter said he had a video of this where he watched me change the actual gravity of the wall. So I could run up the wall and then shoot off the wall and land somewhere else. And I changed the gravity there so I could bounce and roll.
Wow.
And these guards that changed right after I left it, the guards couldn't do it. And they were actually getting injured trying to jump or move or do whatever like I did.
We see disclosure of all of this in movies and video games. Even the Bourne Identity movies, yes. That's a super soldier disclosure.
Yes. Treadstone, Blackbriar, yes.
Yeah, exactly. And even the assets and everybody that's hired in that movie, they're all super soldiers. I mean, they all doing parkour and their fighting abilities are just like elite. And hearing you talk, that's what I think of.
It is the same thing. I look at that, and by the way, they're also both ran by the CIA. So just so clear.
Yeah.
So, the guy who was handing me off to the programs was the CIA attaché that was attached to our unit. I believe he was there for a reason.
Yeah.
He's also the same guy who later on got me into some issues while I was actually deployed with Kruger. This guy that we used to call the John, John David Lynch. You probably heard about him in some of the Call of Duty games.
Oh, okay.
Another guy by the name of Jason Adler that worked with him. It's also in Call of Duty. Those monikers are real names. But the thing with John David Lynch, his actual name is Burke, Martin Burke. And so there's a whole big story behind that Peter and I have been kind of weeding out, trying to find the truth in the middle of all that. But the idea is that these CIA people use human assets and trade human assets and move them into the program so that the programs can stay continually active.
So then, there are multiple programs going on at one time, and you ended up in Kruger. which, like I said earlier, that's like kind of an off the books program. Can you explain what life was like in Kruger and what you guys did there?
So the phrase for Kruger is actually Kruger Mercenary Corps, KMC, is the joke that we kind of talk about within the group. And the Mercenary Corps, you're correct, it was an off-the-books Black Ops military budget program. We used TR-3s to do inserts into our target locations, either on planet or off planet.
TR-3, a triangle craft, the black triangle? Okay.
Or gray, some more gray,
okay.
Depending upon the revision. Like if you go A through C, I think they're black. As soon as you get to the D revision, it's more like a gunmetal gray color on.
Interesting.
But yeah, they are triangular craft, and they vary in size. Some of them do. But the idea is that we use those craft to do insertions and extractions, meaning your infill, exfil portion of the mission. So yeah, we did that. We did tons of training on that every day. We do like these little drills. You run on board the craft. You'd sit down in the seats. They would call the drill that they would do was they would actually have a pilot actually activate the light tree that's right behind the officer. So at red, you're in your seat. At orange, you're actually standing up and you're getting ready to actually step on these yellow footprints. When the yellow comes on, you step on the yellow footprints and pull these two cords down, it locks into your armor, the DLI, the dual line insert system. At green, the bottom of the ship actually opens up and they drop you out.
Wow.
All that takes about a minute.
And then
it has become autonomic, basically, is what they're trying to do.
So that was the training. Did you ever do that? Did you ever actually do that in real missions? Or?
We did it for every mission we did.
Okay.
Minus two that I know of. And those were both off planet. They were actually elsewhere.
So these were missions on Earth you're talking about.
Yes.
So what kind of missions were you actually doing here on Earth then?
Well, we had a variety of missions. One, you have to understand that most of what Kruger did in terms of mission parameters was all ICC Superboard certified and okayed, meaning the triumvirate basically came in and said, we need you to do mission X or assist with mission X. So what they would typically do is they'd have Earth Defense Forces dealing with part of it. They would call in Kruger to deal with the part that didn't want to get screwed up. So there may be ETs on the planet, but they'd have us come retrieve the tech or us deal with the big baddies that the normal EDF guys could not deal with. Because we had amped up bodies, we had super soldier abilities, all kinds of stuff. So
yeah, I think I remember you telling a story one time that like they almost were using a kind of a looking glass technology or something. They would actually see the mission before it happened so that you would know exactly what you needed for that mission. And
yes.
And if somebody was going to get hurt, you knew what type of medical gear to bring.
Yeah.
That's fascinating to me.
They have folks that do that. They can dip into the highest probable timeline, right? Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean it's always going to happen that way. The mission that retired me out of Kruger actually did not happen the way the looking glass technology said it would.
Really?
What it tells you is that the individual who in the CIA basically screwed us over, he actually made a decision during that mission live that caused me and Peter and other people to get either hurt, retired, or dead.
Really?
Yep.
But prior to that, it was always just wham, bam. You knew exactly what you're doing in and out, effortless kind of.
I would say the three big tags that would always show up in our missions, and we did like 60 plus missions with Kruger, okay? So the three big tags that always showed up, the first one is Mobius tech, which essentially is timeline co-creative manipulation tech that was developed prior to us here. And Mobius hijacked it, started using it, and we started recovering it to shut it down.
Isn't that the soul trap technology? Is that not Mobius or not?
It fits the same profile, yes. I would have to say, in my opinion, yes, it is the same technology. But the idea of a soul trap, it's not the really correct term. That's actually an incorrect moniker for what that technology really does. But the idea is that you have to understand that we're living in a created pocket universe because Mobius had screwed up the previous attempts to try to manipulate our universe. So do that for a minute. All right.
Do any of this for a minute. Shit.
That'll warp some people's noodles, right?
Yeah.
But the idea is that technology it can be unstable, but ETs typically have been using it because of that instability. They know it has an area of effect. So, for example, this is what I'll talk about for just a second here. Think about the unrest that's been going on in the Middle East for the number of years it's been there, right?
Yeah.
And the idea is that these ET groups and Mobius have been plopping Mobius tech right in these hot spots, and the area of effect is affecting everybody around it. This is why you see these wars start cropping up in certain areas, or the Arab Spring, or all of these Muslim insurgencies and riots in Europe, for example, or what happened in Russia with Chechnya and all these, the issues they had there. All that crap.
Is it like a group think? It makes everybody puts everybody on the same page.
Sort of, yeah. What it does is the unit basically has these two large twisted crystals inside it. They're the power source that manipulates the time, space, matter around us, right?
Mm-hmm.
The actual processing unit has 4 buttons on it. And that tells them to what degree they're going to manipulate that co-creative ability we have. And what it does is it actually continually suggests to the people in that area of effect that maybe you should do this. It's continually trying to implant that thought into the thought streams, right? And
it's like a subliminal message, kind of, yeah.
Yeah, but it's happening on a brainwave frequency. So you have this information constantly being dumped, right? Constantly reinforced, constantly dumped. And all of a sudden, people start having this thought of, well, maybe I should go do that. And all of a sudden, now they're being controlled by that tech, right?
Wow.
It's one of the things that super soldiers are actually immune to is Mobius tech, because we've already got our brain hemi-synced. Outside influences don't affect us that way anymore.
So where do you said the Middle East, this technology is located? I mean, I can see
all
this
over the world.
All over the world, yeah.
All over the world, but that's one of the areas that specifically that we kept going back to a lot there in Europe.
I feel like this would be used in like major cities and stuff to you can keep people asleep that way, right?
Yes, absolutely, right.
Yeah. You can put low vibe thoughts into their head and like very primitive desires and cravings and stuff like that.
Yeah. If you have an area where, let's say that you're trying to make sure that people do not revolt, you could program the tech and turn it on and actually put it on what they call aggressive mode, which is the top mode. And that's exactly what you're talking about with people going to sleep. People will not, they will not rebel. They're like, I don't want any part of that. I don't want to mess with El Jefe. I don't want to mess with, Lapicia, sorry. They won't do it. And because they're afraid, and they basically, the co-creative part of their brain is basically telling them that I do not want any part of any sort of insurrection or rebellion or revolution.
Is this what happened in Phoenix, the Phoenix Lights, why nobody remembers that? Like it just kind of came and went? Can they do that to make people forget this UFO sighting?
They can, and they also they call it these gases that the Draco used in their craft. They can also, I think William Tompkins even talked about this.
William Tompkins.
Yeah, he actually has an actual photograph of the reptilian tanker emitting this gas. Yeah.
So you have this gas that can be put over large population areas, right? It does that too, but on a more direct interaction layer, right? So there's multiple ways they can do this, and they usually use the tech and the gas in areas with high population centers. Contrails is another way to tell if you're in a high population center, by the way. If you do not have contrails above where you live, they're probably not using Mobius tech or the gases there.
Oh, they're using them here. Using it here for sure.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Okay.
So that was, I would say the Mobius tech was number one. Off-worlders, meaning people who are not Terran, would be number two. And three would be where we would be given directives and mandates directly by the super board, meaning the missions I talked about with Paul Serene, where I took his clone out, right?
Yeah.
That was an actual triumvirate direct action mission that we were told we had to do. There was no way of getting around that. We were basically told we have to do this, and that is that, and have fun. And
so, go ahead.
So basically, that's the three main groups of the missions you typically find Kruger people in, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And usually they're contracted, they're paid and contracted to go do that particular mission. So
let's get in. I mean, this could go on forever. There's a million directions we could go, but you mentioned Paul Serene and Kevin Spacey. So how many? So from what I understand, Kevin Spacey is a clone of Paul Serene, basically. But Kevin Spacey doesn't actually know that there's another version of him in the programs.
Paul Serene is using a cloned body of Kevin Spacey, yes.
Okay. And then this is the case with other actors and politicians or not? Like I've heard you say Tom Cruise before, I think.
So if you look at Monarch, which is the company that Paul Serene owns and operates, he actually provides a security service to Hollywood and elite people who have the money to pay for a clone. And what he does is he gives them the ability to give them that he calls ultimate blanket security, meaning if they kill the clone, you're still alive, right?
Sure.
We'll even provide psychological services to help you when you come back, sort of a thing. That's the way he markets this to the Hollywood, the political people, your CFR Bilderberger people, all those guys. And what ends up happening is that when he gets that genetic sample, they have the ability to use that clone elsewhere now.
I've heard that, I don't even know where I heard this from anymore, but I've heard that like Tom Cruise in particular, like they use his clone in movies. That's why he does all of his own stunts, and that's why he doesn't need a stunt double because it's his clone.
I would disagree with that because I know he broke his ankle filming one of the Mission Impossible movies.
Okay.
He talked about it. But the clone being used actually is a guy who actually runs the Umbrella Corp. And you guys may have heard of the what's the game where they have the zombies that are created by the virus.
Resident Evil.
Yeah. That's Umbrella.
Mm-hmm.
Again, hard disclosure showing what Umbrella does as a biological weapons manufacturer. So they take off-world tech, they turn it into bioweapons, then they sell it to the other programs. In terms of like, you know, what they're doing, how they're doing it. Anyhow, that umbrella tech basically falls into the NBC category, right? Now, typically they don't do nuclear, but they definitely do chemical, biological tech all the time. And I was trying to think what the guy's name is. It's in that group. Let me find it here real quick. It is. Yeah, the guy who runs this name is Richard Bay. He's the guy running Umbrella Corp. And he's not a nice gentleman. So basically on that page we were looking at that had the worldwide military corporations, I'll bring this back up again here real quick.
Yeah.
So you guys can see this. Basically you see this little statement here that says 4 corporations of positive influence on humanity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then when you scroll down, it says corporations with a negative influence on humanity. And look who the top one listed here is. It's Monarch. Monarch, Mobius, and Delphi. Umbrella is also listed here too. Murkoff, Shaw House. There's quite a few of them in here. But the idea is that as these corporations start doing more and more operations against the will of the people here on the planet, that shoves them more into that negative category. That makes sense to people.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
I remember you saying one time there's a photograph on the internet somewhere of Kevin Spacey and with somebody else.
Ghislaine Maxwell.
Ghislaine Maxwell, however you say her name. But it's actually not Kevin Spacey. That's actually Paul Serene in that photo.
Yes.
Are you able to pull that up?
I haven't been able to find it. They took it off the internet.
Makes sense.
No, of course
they scrubbed a bunch of crap off the internet here within the last 4 months. Basically, the easiest way to tell when you look at a picture of Kevin Spacey to figure out if it's him or Paul is when you watch the body language, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, Kevin's a great actor, don't get me wrong. But the idea is that when you watch the body language involved with how Paul operates, he understands that there's if something happens and he's out in public, Kevin's the one taking the hit, not him.
So he could potentially be the one who's responsible for all the pedophilia allegations.
Yeah, he actually is. I'll say that on the record. Yes, he is.
So it's not technically, it's not Kevin Spacey.
No.
I wonder how many other people that's the case for.
Well, and I'll show another good example, right? So you look at Shaw House, for example, that Peter talks about all the time. Jeanette Shaw uses a clone of Taylor Swift, and guess what? Their office is in London, and who is she currently dating? She's dating a very well-known British actor who lives where? In London. So you have to start asking some questions. Who are we dealing with here? Are we dealing with Taylor, or are we dealing with the clone? It's Jeanette Shaw.
Yeah. That's it's so fascinating about so much information about this clone program coming forward. I think that's going to be.
So there are three reasons why three big companies who use clones and practice and study with clones. First is Kruger. Second is Monarch, because of the security solution they're providing to Hollywood, the elites, these big elite groups, right?
Yeah.
The third one is a company that Peter's talked about, USS Ark Corp. And what they're doing essentially, Peter and I have chatted about this company. Ark, in that title, stands for Antediluvian Recovery Center. And what that means is they're going through looking at all these people's genetics on Earth. They're trying to recover what they call the Adam genes, the Adamo genes. If you look back at Zechariah Sitchin or the Adaharsa story, the Epic of Gilgamesh, that idea of Adamo being the first man, being the first us, that particular being had a lifespan in current years of 720 years, which is a reason for that astrologically, which I could go into, but I don't have time to do that. But the idea is that they're trying to find the genetics that allows us to go from a 72-year lifespan back to that original genetics of 720.
Interesting.
The Lyrans are doing this, by the way, because they consider us to be their genetic cousins. So just so we're clear.
So, wow, this is deep stuff. So the cloning, I just think the clone program is going to be a major part of disclosure that I think most of the public is going to have the hardest time with, knowing that some of their politicians and actors have been clones the entire time.
There's two things I'm going to say directly about the whole clone aspect that I have a big issue with. And I've said this, you guys have probably heard my videos where I've talked to this guy who's a policy guy for Biden, right?
Oh, yeah.
When I sent my letters to him, the clone aspect of this was the hardest for me to write because I had a lot of heartfelt issues around it. How are people going to feel when they find out there's a copy of them up there being used for, sexual slavery, torture, they're being partially eaten, regenerated, all kinds of stupid shit. And then you've got the other aspect of this is what happens if we bring them back and this person commits a crime and it looks like you did it.
Yeah. I mean,
genetically, they're an exact copy of you.
Sure.
Yeah. It's a huge problem.
I'll just say this. I have no way of verifying it, but I've had somebody make me aware, and I'm not going to disclose who, but they said that there's a clone of me alive right now in S4, Area 51, basically, living at the same time, basically. And I was cloned at age 5, and this whole thing, I'm like, I don't know if that's true. I have no way of knowing that, but
they do that sometimes.
Hearing these testimonies, it's just like, well, it seems possible. I have no idea.
So the other side of this too, right, is the fact when you get into programs like Kruger, you realize also the security necessity of having clones, right? Because you realize if you don't have an asset in the clone body and you lose that clone asset either through capture or killing, all of a sudden you've now lost, 21 years of training plus the cost of the clone, plus the cost of the individual and the training. And for a clone, it's an easy payout. You pay $1.7 million, you have a new clone sitting there, and you've got the asset information still contained in the frozen cryo asset. To me, it's a no-brainer. That's like a no-brainer to me.
Yeah.
It's hard. That is going to be tough. Like you said, when people discover that about themselves, that's not easy. Not easy. That's why when people say like full disclosure now,
on top of just the trafficking and child trafficking, pedophilia.
Yeah.
So that's another aspect of this, right? So when we talk about this idea of healing, where Ted and I and some others have talked about this idea of working through our internal work and doing the healing, right?
Yeah.
Working with a therapist, working with, specialists, working with, spiritual specialists to do this kind of work. what we're really saying is that the part of what's going on is that you also have to process all that stuff that happened to you as a child, right? So think about this, right? I mean, again, I don't want to get you guys knocked off of your channel, but there are particular topics that show up around the child end of this that don't show up anywhere else in the programs, right? You have all the child sex trafficking. You've got clones being made of these kids. And the thing is, oh, by the way, a lot of these kids, I have a friend of mine, I've told this story before. He's a SEAL team commander. He actually was in Michigan. They did a retrieval up there. It was 123 kids. It made the news, made ABC News. And when they got there, he was actually out on the boat, first off, training with the Coast Guard in Lake Erie. JSOC calls him on the sat phone and says, "You're going to be taken off the boat and you're going to Michigan." Okay. They come back to shore. CH-53D picks them up, takes them to this place in Michigan. When they land, there's already FBI at both ends of this underground bunker. It's a warehouse. Now, here's the thing, right? When you're looking at a building and it has case steel fire and blast proof doors, that takes money.
Yeah.
I don't care who you are. But these guys get there, and the FBI can't get in. They've been hitting it with bullets. They've been trying to, take it off the hinges, whatever. The door won't budge. And they asked the SEAL commander, said, "Can you guys make those doors go away?" He asked one of his guys, who's an EOD guy. He says, "Can we do that?" And the guy's like, "Yep, we got that in the bag." And all of a sudden, the doors get blown off the hinges. And when they go in, they took those 8 guys inside this front office area. 6 of those 8 guys died. 2 were restrained. They were trying to keep them from getting to this back door that actually went into the main warehouse area. And inside that main warehouse area, they had suspended cages with 123 kids in it. Each kid's in a singular cage.
Wow.
And these kids have been tortured. They have been, all kinds of bad stuff. But the big thing that hit there was a certain chemical they've been extracting out of these kids. And they were storing it in these large 55-gallon drums that are shipping elsewhere.
Adrenochrome?
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, here's the thing, right? So a kid typically produces 6 to 8 ounces of adrenochrome over the course of their life, right? Think about this. And they've got 55-gallon drums of it.
Gosh. Jesus. I mean, and that's one tiny facility that they were able to break into. There's thousands probably. I mean, and that's just on Earth.
When I was talking to this guy via phone call, his comment to me was, he's like, "Will," he goes, "I've seen all kinds of crap, that I've seen in combat, I've seen in battle, I've seen all kinds of stuff." And he goes, "I still can't get that vision out of my head." He goes, "Us trying to get these kids out of this cage, and these kids, that's why they lived their entire life was inside this cage. They've never been outside that cage. Most of them are clones. They're not even on the record. None of them had any sort of SSNs. None of them had any sort of documentation or names. They're all tracked by a number. And the system they track these people in is the same system they use off planet called TAPSIS, which essentially is a slave tracking system, essentially, asset tracking system. And these kids have been put in the system. They were being tracked. They're being used. And it was completely off the books, knowing who these people were, who these kids were. These kids were not really, quote unquote, missing, which means either another slave was bred to make these children, or they were cloned.
Wow.
But the idea is this is the negative aspect of cloning too, right? So when you have people using technology in ways that was never designed or meant to be used, this is what happens.
I've also heard you say that reptilians clone humans as meals, basically, or something along those lines. Like they just they clone people just because they eat us basically alive.
So we are considered a delicacy by the Draco. And one of the things we have to kind of understand is that part of what happens is some of these slaves will get partially eaten and then regenerated. And here's the thing, right? That memory's never wiped out of your head.
Yeah.
So this person's continually going through this process of regeneration and being eaten.
That's
horrible. The level of technology involved here is humanity is just not, they will not be able to wrap their head around it. I mean, people like us, because we've been listening to you, we understand that it's out there, but we don't know how it works. And then we've never seen it actually in action. We just hear about it. So even I think we would be shocked at some level with seeing it. That's where I think people are going to have the hardest time, is just not even that this stuff is happening, but the technology that they're using to accomplish all this stuff. It's
been running for a long time. The program's been running for a very long time.
Yeah.
If we speak in just current modern day here and now terms, we can definitely track it back at least to the 20s and 30s of 1920, 1930s. So when people tell me that there's no way we could have this level of technology, it's like, well, this program's already been technically in place in the here and now for at least 100 years. And think about if you look at, was it Miller's Law or Smith's Law that talks about the technology doubling every so many years?
Yeah.
Or the technological level of advancement doubling every so many years. Well, think about these SSP programs that have been doubling since 1920, 1930.
Yeah.
They've been doubling too.
Yeah.
And they've been doubling already, starting off advanced.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because ETs have basically seeded that technology, seeded the information here.
Yeah.
In the German case, we had Lierens and Draco seeding this information to them. We also had the Vril seeding technology to them, right?
Yeah.
The Japanese had Lierens seeding information to them as well. And then all of a sudden, this technology just kind of poofs out of nowhere. Well, not really out of nowhere, but it's from these ET species, right? So, and the thing is, we've been using clones down here too, right? So look at as another weird example of cloning. Look at Japan and Korea, right? Who've both been at the very, very front edge, the razor's edge of what is considered to be human and animal cloning today, right?
Mm-hmm.
They've been doing this for a long time. Where do you think they got the technology from? Well, from up there. They gave the Japanese that technology, and the Japanese outsourced it to South Korea, and they're now both the leading leaders in that area of technology. It's a no-brainer to those of us who've been in the programs.
How many soldiers do you think in World War I and II were clones? I've heard that almost the whole army was a clone army from certain sources. I don't know if that's verifiable or not.
They do not use augments or clones down here, first off and foremost.
Okay.
But they do use augments and clones up there in certain organizations. Nancht Waffen, they don't like augments. What I mean by an augment, by the way, is the idea that you have a being who's a clone who's been genetically changed to have a certain genetic disposition up there. They will, in fact, edit humans in their 1.0 bodies to make them compatible for up there in Nancht Waffen Regir. And many of us have been. MDF, you're already technically edited, because you've already went through MKUltra and all this other stuff, right?
Yeah.
So they do use, in Kruger, they do use cyborgs. They do use, and cyborgs usually is in a clone body as well, by the way, just so we're clear. But they use a lot of cloning there, a lot of heavy cloning, because to them, it's easier to take a clone, manipulate it the way you want, and transfer the essence in, because the essence and the clone come from the same DNA source, right? Now all of a sudden you have a link. It's kind of like Avatar, right? When you watch the movie Avatar,
Mm-hmm.
where the brother who was also the twin of the guy who died could also take over that same Avatar body because of the genetic linkage, right?
Okay.
It's the same thing in Kruger, where you have a genetic linkage between you and that clone. And there's also a linkage between your biochip and that clone body as well. And Peter's talked about this quite a bit with James and others. But the idea is that biochip is also a link to that same clone as well.
So what? Yeah, just common everyday knowledge.
Right.
So what are the potentials of Hitler being cloned? What happened with him? Have you heard any of that?
Well, okay, so there's three main stories I've heard. All right, so if you follow the standard historical narrative, he died in Berlin, which I don't believe, by the way, but
Sure.
that's the mainstream historical narrative.
Mm-hmm.
The story that I do believe, based on all the research, based on everything that I've seen, was the story that Bob Baer did in his TV series Hunting Hitler.
Mm-hmm.
That to me was the closest to the facts based on everything they were able to uncover. And he died in South America in 1965.
Yeah, he basically went to Argentina.
Well, he actually died up north of Argentina. But yes, it was actually a small city that was there, a small group of people. Martin Bormann, Hitler, and a few others all escaped up to this little area, and they started raising families, having their own life there. They had a ton of capital to work from. They bought their own houses, started businesses. But the idea is that they didn't think that was abnormal. And by the way, these individuals that went to South America were people that were chosen or not deemed essential for the secret space programs. Because what happened was all the people that went to base 211 in Antarctica, New Schwabenland, those individuals were trying to make a legitimate break from the Nazi Third Reich. We actually call those guys Antarctic Germans, or AGs.
AGs, yeah.
Now, that particular group was very afraid politically that the UN and the U.S. military specifically, like what happened with Operation High Jump, would try to come down and actually try to wipe them out. So by the end of World War II, they were already off planet and up at the LOC. They moved all their assets, all their people, anything of importance to the programs up there. They did keep some people down at Base 211 because of what we saw with Operation High Jump. But I personally feel that was a security contingent, because we're still Draco in the base when they left, because that base in New Schwabenland actually rented from the Draco.
Yeah. So the Draco base was already there before they even moved in, basically. They kind of they were working with the Draco the entire time.
Yeah,
anyway.
The Larens and the Vril, yes.
Yeah. So you talked about your two theories on Hitler. Was there a third one?
The third theory that I heard, and again, I have no way to confirm this, but I've heard it from multiple people, so that there may be some truth to this, was that Hitler was in fact cloned, essence copied and transferred, and he was taken off planet at one point. The original biological body died in 1965. This copy was taken off planet, and I've heard that it was either in Ceres or Mars where they saw a copy of that clone. And both, by the way, both of those locations both had German, what we call Mars German influences, the MGs.
Yeah.
They both had groups up there who were in fact actually, Mars Germans. That is plausible that they could have taken him up there as some way to maintain this idea of what happened on Earth. Now, the narrative is when they started taking these slaves off planet, they knew they had to have a way to keep them from rebelling. So they made the story of a Third World War, the Earth in 1949 getting cobalt bombed, and there's no way for them to go back.
Okay. I've heard that. I think I've heard you say that before, yeah.
And James and I have talked about it. Peter's talked about it. I've heard that from multiple people.
Even Tony Rodriguez, who we just had on, he talked about it also. Yeah.
Well, and that's the story I heard actually at Ceres. That's what the first place I ever heard it was at Ceres.
Yeah.
Tony and I talked about it when we did my talk on his channel, where my security group was brought in. We cleaned up a mess that the Fuhrer of the base wanted us to clean up, the command of the base. And we're basically waiting to be debriefed, and we were told to go have a lunch or dinner or whatever. Our guys are sitting in one area, and there's some slaves operating on Ceres sitting right next to us at a table, and they're all talking about this narrative about how Earth was wiped out in 1949 by these big cobalt bombs. And the equivalent type bomb they're talking about is, if you look at what the Russians did with the Tsar bomb, the RDS-220, that's equivalently the size of the bomb they're talking about here. Looking like a massive bomb.
Really?
Right? And I heard that narrative there, but I was like, what are these guys talking about? Earth's still fine. I didn't say this, but I'm definitely thinking it, right?
Yeah.
And that's the thing with the programs, by the way. A lot of times when you're in doing your job, you think a lot of stuff, but you never say it out loud. Not the point, though. The point is that that is a common narrative that you do hear up in some of the German facilities off planet. They talk about that particular narrative.
Yeah. Well, and so there seems to be a large German presence in the solar system. I mean, how many breakaway civilizations or off-world colonies do you think they have besides Mars and Ceres?
Well, there's been three three potential breakaway civilizations, right? The Mayans, potentially the Templars, and the Germans for different reasons. Okay. We know for a fact the Mayans definitely did, because they were actually picked up by the Palladians and taken to Taijeta, where they were, in fact, they were allowed to settle there.
Yeah, I've heard that too. Yeah.
Well, actually, CG talks about it in one of his episodes on Cosmic Disclosure, and I've heard other people talk about it.
That's why I heard that. Okay, yeah, okay.
Mm-hmm. But the fact is, I actually have met that group of individuals. That's why I'm saying that. There was some speculation that's happened with the Templars, although I have no proof of that. And the third group was obviously the Germans, who were influenced to start moving that way. And they did. They were able to make technology. See, the first two groups would have been taken off planet. This third group, they wanted them to actually leave the planet on their own, under their own technology and their own guidance. And that's exactly what we're talking about here, where you had the Germans moving to the moon, and eventually to Mars, and they move into the belt, which is where Sirius comes into play. And they started establishing other facilities on Jupiter, Saturn, and other places in the system, even all the way out to the Oort cloud, like Maki and other locations.
Now, is Maki, there's a station just past the Oort cloud, I've heard. It's like a very high-ranking station. Is that Maki, or
yes?
Is that okay? And that's like between here and Alpha Centauri? Well,
it's actually just on the very verge of the outside of the Oort cloud, and it is used as a security observation post. That is actually a pretty highly classified location, because what they're doing is any fleet that would try to come into our system, 9 times out of 10, gravitationally speaking, they're going to come in along the ecliptic plane of the system. Meaning, if you look at the sun, all these planets are moving around.
Oh, hang on a second.
Horizontal pattern.
Or you froze up for a second, but you're good. You say if you look at the sun, what?
If you're looking at the sun, you would try to come in. The ships would try to come in inside the gravitational ecliptic of that system, because they can slingshot around planets and save fuel. That's typically what an invading species would do. That's what we did. So what you typically see happen is that as that kind of ship or group of ships comes in, the armada would come in, they're going to come along the ecliptic, and Maki observes that ecliptic plane, because it's not in the ecliptic plane. And what it does is it would tell the LOC, hey, you've got a large group of inbound ships coming in. You need to do something about it.
Interesting. So have you actually been to that station?
Yes. It's also a refueling station too, but yes.
Well, what do you use for fuel?
Well, for example, like some of the smaller craft, they actually use fusion cells.
Okay.
They might even use nuclear reactive components in some of the older ships. You also do crew retrofits. So, for example, you might take a Mantis or a Dart from, say, Earth out to Maki, drop people off. If they're not using a gate system, by the way, they could do it that way. And what would happen is you could transfer people, personnel, equipment, whatever you need. It's also a way to keep the Nancht Waffen fleet out of the solar system, right? Now, we already have gate systems set up at New Earth, or what we call Corellia. You can walk straight in from that gate directly into the LOC. This is also the same gate system that's used from LAX to Mars and to the LOC as well.
Yeah, I've heard about that one just outside of LAX.
Yep.
Like a jump room, yeah.
Well, that jump room you're talking about is the gate system itself, right? Okay. So that's the quickest way to get people and things between these locations. But at the same time, there are cases where you don't want to do that, especially if you're using what they call a security controlled asset, like a cyborg, that doesn't have all its mental components. Yeah, you don't want to use a gate system with a cyborg. Bad.
What did the inside of the station look like, Maki? Are any of these stations or ships like organically based?
No.
This is okay.
They start off TBM'd. They send a crew in that does the TBM portion first. Then they drill out the whole, like the guts of the station first. And as that station is going, it's actually creating concrete or the wall segments out of the actual material as TBMing. When the TBM's finally removed, they bring in these engineers who set up the environmental stuff first. I mean, it's like a pressurize the base, right?
Okay.
And that's the first thing that usually happens is once they get those engineers done, that's when they bring in all the other people to set up the electronics, to set up all the wiring, to set up all of the, if you're using the communications gear or any of that kind of stuff. At that point, that comes in after all the TBMing and the initial environmental stuff set up in place.
Wow, that's fascinating. Your knowledge on this is so vast, and I didn't even expect you to know the construction process. So this is not like a space station like we would imagine. It's like a planetary body that they kind of take over.
Convert into base, yeah.
Okay, very interesting. So let's go ahead and wrap up this first segment. We haven't even barely touched on your testimony. We've been getting into so many other things.
Sure.
So much to digest, so much to take in. Thank you for doing this. Thank you guys for listening. Don't forget, we're going to be at Starseed Adventure Conference in March with Tony Rodriguez, actually. Tickets are available. There's only 200 tickets available. I don't know how many have been sold, but if you feel compelled, grab a ticket, come hang out with us on the beach, Cocoa Beach, Florida. The link is below, and it'll be great to meet some of you guys. Johan, thanks. We'll be back shortly. And until next time, guys, have a good evening.